The dust never settled in Redemption Valley. It hung in the air like a permanent reminder of how unforgiving the Texas frontier could be in 1866. Samuel Crawford wiped the sweat from his weathered face as he mended the fence around his modest cattle ranch. The same fence that separated his land from the harsh realities of a world still bleeding from war. At 52, Samuel had learned to keep to himself. His wife Martha had passed 3 winters ago, and his only son had fallen at Gettysburg wearing Union blue. The townspeople of Cedar Ridge had never quite forgiven him for that, for raising a boy who chose the wrong side in their eyes. But Samuel had raised his son to think for himself, and he died believing every man deserved freedom. The sound of horses thundering across the prairie broke through his thoughts. Samuel looked up to see a cloud of dust approaching fast, too fast for casual travelers. As the riders came closer, he could make out Sheriff Morrison leading a group of rough-looking men. Bounty hunters. Their faces were grim, their weapons ready. "Crawford!" Sheriff Morrison called out as they reined in their horses near his fence. "You seen a runaway slave boy?" About 15, skinny as a rail, answers to the name Thomas. His master's offering $50 for his return. Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd heard whispers about a boy who'd escaped from a plantation near Austin, but seeing the hunger in these men's eyes made his stomach turn. "Can't say I have, Sheriff. Don't get many visitors out here." One of the bounty hunters, a snake-eyed man named Garrett, spat into the dust. "Mind if we take a look around your property, old man? That boy's been spotted heading this direction." "I do mind," Samuel replied calmly, though his hand moved instinctively toward the rifle leaning against the fence post. "This is private property, and you've got no warrant." Morrison's face darkened. "Don't make this difficult, Crawford. We all know where your sympathies lie. Your boy died fighting for the wrong cause, and now you're harboring criminals." "My boy died fighting for what he believed in," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the anger building in his chest. "And the last I checked, the law says slavery's been abolished. That makes this boy free, not criminal." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Garrett's hand moved to his gun, but Morrison held up a warning hand. "The boy's still property until we get him back to his rightful owner. Don't test us, Crawford." As the riders wheeled their horses around and headed back toward town, Samuel felt eyes watching him from the barn. He waited until the dust settled completely before walking slowly toward the weathered building. Inside, hidden behind bales of hay, a frightened young face peered out. "They gone?" The boy whispered, his voice barely audible. Samuel nodded. "For now. But they'll be back." He studied the teenager, all bones and determination, with intelligent eyes that had seen too much. "What's your real name, son?" "Thomas, like they said." "Thomas Washington." I've been running for 8 days now. Ain't eaten much of nothing." Samuel's decision came without hesitation. "Come on up to the house." Martha always said no one should face trouble on an empty stomach. As they walked toward the small ranch house, Thomas hung back nervously. "Mr. Crawford, you don't know me from Adam. Why you helping me?" Samuel paused on the porch steps, looking out over the endless expanse of prairie. "Because every man deserves the chance to choose his own path. My son taught me that before he died. And because it's the right thing to do." Inside the house, Samuel prepared a simple meal while Thomas sat awkwardly at the kitchen table, his eyes darting constantly toward the windows. The boy's hand shook slightly as he ate. Whether from hunger, exhaustion, or fear, Samuel couldn't tell. "Where you headed, Thomas?" "North. Heard tell there's work in Kansas, maybe Colorado. Just want to make my own way, earn my own money." Thomas looked up with determination burning in his young eyes. "I can read and write, Mr. Crawford. My mama taught me in secret. I ain't afraid of hard work." Samuel nodded approvingly. "That's good. Education's something no one can take away from you." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "You can stay in the barn tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to get you safely on your way." As darkness fell over Redemption Valley, Samuel lay in his bed thinking about the choice he'd made. He knew the townspeople would turn against him if they discovered he was harboring Thomas. His ranch was everything he had left, and he was risking it all for a boy he barely knew. But somewhere in his heart he could almost hear Martha's voice whispering approval, and he imagined his son Jonathan nodding with pride. Some things were worth the risk. Morning came too soon, announced by the sound of multiple horses approaching the ranch. Samuel had barely finished his coffee when he saw them. A delegation from Cedar Ridge led by Mayor Whitmore, Sheriff Morrison, and several prominent townsmen. Their faces were set in hard lines, and Samuel knew his secret hadn't lasted the night. Samuel Crawford. Mayor Whitmore's voice boomed across the yard as Samuel stepped onto his porch. "We need to have a serious conversation." Samuel crossed his arms and leaned against the porch rail, projecting a calm he didn't entirely feel. "Morning, gentlemen. What brings you out so early?" "Don't play dumb with us, Crawford," snapped Jeremiah Hayes, the owner of the general store. "Word's gotten around that you're hiding that runaway slave. Mrs. Patterson saw smoke coming from your barn last night, and Joe Miller swears he saw two shadows moving around your property after dark." The men had formed a semicircle in front of his porch, their body language aggressive and intimidating. Samuel counted 8 of them, all armed, all looking like they meant business. Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his badge catching the morning sunlight. "Samuel, I'm giving you one chance to do the right thing here. Turn over the boy and we'll forget this ever happened. Keep protecting him, and you'll face charges for harboring a fugitive." "Fugitive from what?" Samuel's voice remained steady. "Far as I know, slavery's been abolished." "That makes him a free man." "Not if his master wants him back." Hayes shouted, his face flushing red. "There's legal procedures for this sort of thing. You can't just steal a man's property." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Property? We're talking about a human being, Jeremiah. A boy with dreams and hopes just like your own son." Mayor Whitmore shook his head disgustedly. "This is exactly what we expected from you, Crawford. First, you raise a son to fight against his own people, and now you're siding with runaway slaves. Don't you have any loyalty to your community?" "My loyalty is to what's right," Samuel replied firmly. "And protecting that boy is right." The crowd murmured angrily at his words. Bill Tucker, a local rancher, spat in the dirt. "You're a fool, Crawford. That boy ain't worth losing everything over. You think he'd do the same for you?" "This ain't about what he'd do for me," Samuel said. "It's about what kind of man I choose to be." Dr. Harrison, typically the most level-headed man in town, stepped forward with a concerned expression. "Samuel, be reasonable. You're outnumbered here. The whole town's talking about this. If you don't turn him over, you'll be completely ostracized. No one will do business with you. You'll lose your ranch." Samuel looked at each face in the crowd, men he'd known for years, some he'd considered friends. The disappointment and anger in their eyes cut deep, but not as deep as his conviction that protecting Thomas was right. "Then I guess I'll lose my ranch," he said quietly. The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Several men stepped backward, shocked by his resolve. "You're making a mistake, Crawford," Morrison warned. "When those bounty hunters come back, and they will come back, don't expect any help from us." As the men remounted their horses and rode away, Samuel noticed curtains twitching in several ranch houses across the valley. Word would spread quickly now. By noon, every person in 3 counties would know that Samuel Crawford was harboring a runaway slave and had chosen to defy his entire community. Inside the barn, Thomas had heard every word. When Samuel found him, the boy was sitting with his head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Mr. Crawford," Thomas said, his voice heavy with guilt. "I never meant to bring this trouble down on you. Maybe I should just go. Turn myself in." Samuel sat down on a hay bale beside him. "Son, if you turn yourself in now, everything I've risked means nothing. But more importantly, everything you've risked means nothing. You didn't run away just to give up when things got difficult, but they're gonna take your ranch. Your whole life. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, thinking about Martha, about Jonathan, about the choices that define a man's character. Thomas, my wife and son are gone. This ranch is just land and buildings. But what we're doing here, this matters. This is about something bigger than property or money. Throughout the day, the isolation became apparent. No one came to buy cattle. The usual visits from neighboring ranchers stopped entirely. Even old Murphy, who'd been delivering supplies for 15 years, rode past without stopping. As evening approached, Samuel and Thomas worked together to reinforce the barn and prepare for whatever might come next. The boy was surprisingly capable with tools, and Samuel found himself genuinely enjoying the company after years of solitude. "Mr. Crawford," Thomas said as they secured the last of the barn doors, "my mama used to say that sometimes God puts people in our path to test our character. I think maybe I was put in your path for a reason." Samuel smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in weeks. "Could be, son. Could very well be." But as night fell and Samuel watched the lights of Cedar Ridge twinkling in the distance, he wondered if his conviction would be enough to weather the storm that was surely coming. The third day dawned gray and ominous, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon that seemed to mirror the tension building around the Crawford Ranch. Samuel had barely slept, knowing that Garrett and his bounty hunters would likely return with reinforcements. What he hadn't expected was the stranger who appeared at his fence line just after sunrise. The man was elderly, his dark skin weathered by decades of hard labor, riding a tired-looking mule. He removed his worn hat as Samuel approached, revealing hair white as cotton. "You be Samuel Crawford?" the old man asked, his voice carrying the dignity of someone who'd survived unimaginable hardships. "I am, and you are?" "Name's Ezekiel Johnson. Folks call me Zeke." He glanced toward the barn where Thomas was hiding. "Heard tell you got a young man here needs help getting north." Samuel studied the stranger carefully. "Where'd you hear that?" Zeke smiled, revealing a gap-toothed grin. "Word travels fast among my people, Mr. Crawford. Faster than you might think. We got our own ways of passing news, and news about a white man willing to risk everything for one of ours. Well, that's the kind of news that travels real fast. What's your interest in this? That boy in your barn ain't the only one trying to make a new life. There's dozens of us scattered across Texas, trying to figure out where we belong now that we're free. Some working for wages, some just wandering, looking for family that got sold off years ago." Zeke's eyes grew intense. "But when we heard about what you'd done, well, it gave us hope. Showed us there's still good people in this world." From the barn, Thomas appeared cautiously, having heard voices. When he saw Zeke, his face lit up with recognition and relief. "Zeke, where did you come from?" The old man dismounted stiffly and embraced the boy. "Been tracking you for 2 days, son. Your mama asked me to watch out for you before they sold her south to Louisiana." Thomas's face crumpled with emotion. "Is she do you know if she's all right? Last I heard, she was working in a house in New Orleans. But Thomas, she made me promise something. Made me promise to make sure you stayed free, no matter what. Said your freedom was worth more than anything else in this world." Samuel watched the reunion with a heavy heart, thinking of his own son and the promises parents make to protect their children. As the two talked, he noticed movement on the horizon, riders approaching from multiple directions. "We got company coming," Samuel announced, reaching for his rifle. But as the riders drew closer, Samuel realized these weren't bounty hunters or angry townspeople. These were freedmen, men and women of all ages, on horseback, on foot, carrying tools and belongings, converging on his ranch from every direction. Zeke noticed Samuel's confusion and chuckled. "Word spread faster than we expected, Mr. Crawford. When folks heard what you'd done for Thomas, they decided they wanted to see this brave white man for themselves." Within an hour, nearly 30 former slaves had gathered at the Crawford Ranch. They came in small groups and as individuals, some with families, others alone. There was Marcus, a blacksmith who'd walked 50 miles after hearing the story. Sarah and her 3 children, who'd been working on a farm near San Antonio. Old Pete, who claimed to be 90 years old and had walked the entire way carrying nothing but a Bible and a walking stick. Samuel found himself surrounded by faces full of hope and determination. These people had risked everything just to see the man who'd stood up for one of their own. "Why?" Samuel asked Zeke quietly. "Why come here? You're all putting yourselves in danger." "Because you showed us something we ain't seen much of," replied Marcus, the blacksmith, overhearing the conversation. "A white man willing to sacrifice for a black child. That's powerful medicine, Mr. Crawford. That's the kind of thing that gives people courage to keep going." As the day progressed, Samuel learned their stories. Many had nowhere to go, working for subsistence wages or simply wandering, trying to find family members. Others had specific destinations in mind but lacked the resources or knowledge to get there safely. "What you did for Thomas," explained Sarah, bouncing her youngest child on her hip. "It showed us that maybe there's a chance for something better. Maybe all this fighting and dying wasn't for nothing." But the gathering hadn't gone unnoticed. By afternoon, Samuel could see dust clouds in the distance. The townspeople were organizing, and they were bringing more men than before. Thomas approached Samuel as evening fell, his young face serious beyond his years. "Mr. Crawford, all these folks came here because of what you done for me. But now they're all in danger too. Maybe it's time I moved on, before something bad happens to everybody." Samuel looked around at the faces of the people who traveled so far just to see hope made real. Children played near the barn while adults shared what little food they had. Despite the danger, there was something beautiful about this unexpected community that had formed around a simple act of kindness. "Son," Samuel said finally, "I think it's too late for that. This has become something bigger than just helping you escape. These people need to know that someone cares about their freedom, their dignity. If we give up now, we let down every person who risked everything to come here." As darkness approached and the gathering around the ranch grew larger, Samuel realized that tomorrow would bring a confrontation unlike anything Redemption Valley had ever seen. But for the first time since Martha's death, he felt like he was part of something larger than himself. The choice was no longer just about saving one boy. It was about proving that freedom and dignity were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Dawn broke clear and bright on the 4th day, as if the sky itself wanted to witness what was about to unfold. Samuel stood on his porch, watching as more freedmen continued to arrive throughout the early morning hours. What had started as a handful of supporters had grown into something extraordinary. Nearly 60 former slaves had come to stand with him and Thomas. They had organized themselves quietly but efficiently. Marcus the blacksmith had emerged as a natural leader, helping coordinate the group's positioning around the ranch. The women had set up a makeshift kitchen near the barn, sharing what food they had. Children stayed close to their parents, sensing the tension but also the electricity of hope in the air. "Mr. Crawford," Marcus approached him as Samuel drank his morning coffee. "We've been talking through the night. These folks want to know, what do you need from us?" Samuel looked out at the sea of faces, weathered hands that had known only hard labor, eyes that had seen unimaginable hardship, yet spirits that refused to be broken. "I appreciate everyone coming, Marcus, but I don't want anyone getting hurt over this." "With respect, sir," said Sarah, joining the conversation, "this ain't just about you or Thomas anymore. This is about proving that freedom means something, that we ain't gonna run and hide every time someone tries to put us back in chains." As if summoned by their words, dust clouds appeared on the horizon. But this time, it wasn't just Sheriff Morrison and the townspeople. Garrett and his bounty hunters had returned with additional men. Samuel counted at least 20 riders approaching fast, armed, and angry. "Everyone stay calm," Samuel called out to the gathered freedmen. "Let me handle this." But as the riders thundered closer, something unexpected happened. The freedmen began to move with purpose, forming two straight lines on either side of the path leading to Samuel's porch. Men, women, and older children stood shoulder to shoulder, their tools and hats held high in their hands, not as weapons, but as symbols of their dignity and determination. The sight was so powerful that even Garrett's horses seemed to slow as they approached. Here was an army unlike any the Old West had ever seen, not soldiers with guns and uniforms, but ordinary people united by an extraordinary cause. Sheriff Morrison reined in his horse at the front of the group, his face flushed with anger and confusion. "What in the hell is going on here, Crawford?" Samuel stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "What's going on is that free people are exercising their right to gather peacefully on my property." "Free people?" Garrett spat, his hand moving to his gun. "These are runaway slaves and troublemakers. And you're harboring a fugitive." That's when Zeke stepped forward from the crowd, his aged voice carrying the weight of decades. "Ain't no slaves here, mister. We're all free now. Been free since President Lincoln said so, been free since this country bled itself near to death to make it so." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd of freedmen. Several raised their tools higher, hammers, hoes, and work implements that represented their right to earn their own living. Mayor Whitmore, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Samuel, this has gone too far. You're creating a dangerous situation here. These people need to disperse and you need to turn over that boy." "No." The voice came from behind Samuel. Thomas Washington stepped onto the porch, his young face set with determination. Despite his fear, he walked to stand beside Samuel. "I won't hide anymore. If you want me, here I am." The crowd of freedmen erupted in voices of support. "Stand strong, son," called out old Pete. "You got nothing to be ashamed of," added Sarah. Samuel placed a protective hand on Thomas's shoulder. "This boy has done nothing wrong except want his freedom. And these people have done nothing wrong except support that freedom. If you want to arrest someone, arrest me." The standoff stretched taut as a wire fence. 20 armed men faced 60 unarmed freedmen, while Samuel and Thomas stood between them. The only sounds were the snorting of horses and the whisper of wind across the prairie. Then something remarkable happened. Dr. Harrison, who had ridden with the townspeople, slowly dismounted his horse. "Sheriff," he said quietly, "I've been thinking about this all night, about what kind of town we want to be, what kind of people we want to be." Morrison turned to him sharply. "Don't tell me you're siding with Crawford now." "I'm siding with what's right," Harrison replied, walking toward the crowd of freedmen. "These people aren't threatening anyone. They're just standing up for their dignity. And maybe maybe we should be standing with them." His words seemed to break something in the air. 2 more townsmen dismounted and walked over to join Harrison. Then another. Garrett and his bounty hunters found themselves increasingly isolated as even some of the local men began to question what they were doing. "This is ridiculous," Garrett shouted, drawing his gun. "I'm taking that boy, and anyone who tries to stop me will regret it." That's when Marcus stepped forward, his blacksmith's arms crossed over his chest. "You'll have to go through all of us first." The entire crowd of freedmen moved as one, stepping closer together, creating an unbreakable wall of solidarity. Children pressed close to their parents, but no one backed down. Samuel felt a surge of emotion as he looked at these brave people who had come so far to support a cause bigger than themselves. "Garrett," he called out, "you're outnumbered. And more importantly, you're on the wrong side of history." Sheriff Morrison looked around at the scene, at the determined faces of the freedmen, at the townspeople who were clearly having second thoughts, at the boy who stood with quiet courage beside Samuel Crawford. After a long moment, he holstered his weapon. "This isn't over, Crawford," Morrison said finally. "But today we're leaving. Come on, men." As the sheriff and most of the townspeople rode away, Garrett remained for a moment longer, his face twisted with rage. You think this changes anything? You think these people have any real power? Zeke smiled at him with infinite patience. Power ain't about guns or threats, son. Power is about people standing together for what's right. And today, that's exactly what we done. As Garrett finally spurred his horse and rode away in defeat, the crowd of freedmen erupted in celebration. Tools and hats flew into the air as people embraced and cheered. Thomas found himself surrounded by people congratulating him on his courage. Samuel stood on his porch, watching the celebration, feeling something he hadn't felt since before Martha died. Hope. Not just for Thomas, or for the brave people gathered in his yard, but for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this country could live up to its promises of freedom and equality. Dr. Harrison approached him as the celebration continued. Samuel, I owe you an apology. What you did, what all of you did today, took real courage. Samuel nodded gratefully. It wasn't just courage, Doc. It was faith. Faith that people are basically good, that freedom matters, and that sometimes one person standing up for what's right can inspire others to do the same. As the sun set over Redemption Valley, the crowd of freedmen began to organize for the journey ahead. Many would continue north to seek new opportunities. Others decided to stay in the area, forming a community that would support each other through the challenges ahead. Thomas approached Samuel as the gathering began to wind down. Mr. Crawford, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Samuel smiled, thinking of his son Jonathan and the pride he would have felt seeing this day. Son, you already thanked me. You thanked me by having the courage to seek your freedom and by standing up here today when it would have been easier to run. That took more bravery than anything I did. As night fell and the last of the visitors settled in for the evening, Samuel Crawford sat on his porch looking out over a valley that somehow seemed different now, not just a harsh frontier, but a place where ordinary people had done something extraordinary. The mocking voices of his neighbors had been replaced by the songs of freed people celebrating their dignity. The lonely rancher who had risked everything for a runaway slave boy had discovered that sometimes, when you stand up for what's right, you don't stand alone. In the morning, Thomas would continue his journey north, but he would carry with him the memory of this day, the day an army of hope stood together and proved that freedom is indeed stronger than any chain.